Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, GCP, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
Ryan,
and Peter.
Episode 214, recorded for May 24th, 2023. The Cloud Pod loves Inspector Gadget. Good evening, Jonathan, Ryan, Matthew, and myself.
Hey, guys.
Evening.
Hello.
How are you guys doing this week in the cloud?
I already told you I don't want to talk about
it. Did you do anything with AI this week, or because Microsoft's been busy with AI, so
you're on a podcast, you have to talk, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I didn't do anything with any intelligence, much less artificial or natural. So, it's been a rough week.
Yeah, it's been long. I agree. Well, there's luckily it's a short show, so we'll see how we can talk for 2 hours. The short show versus a really packed show. We bust through it in 35 minutes, so we'll see how it goes this week. First up, we have general news, courtesy of Matt. Matt found the story for us. Apparently, Alibaba is getting out of the cloud business with a plan to spin off their $12 billion cloud business. It's unclear, though, if they're bowing out of the market due to political pressure or if it's just a bad market. Analysts value the business at $30 billion, and it once was a thriving operation that harbored the potential to have an AWS level of control in China. Alibaba for years touted as its proudest and most touted accomplishment that outstripped rival offerings from Tencent and Baidu. But unfortunately, Beijing grew suspicious of private companies and their cloud services and began cracking down in 2020 while we were all locked down in COVID. Alibaba Cloud drew regulatory ire in 2021 after that for discovering and sharing a flaw before informing authorities, apparently, and was investigated for its role in the largest cybersecurity data breach in Chinese history. This has resulted in overall market losses to Huawei and China Mobile. There's a quote here from Nomura Holdings Inc. analyst Zhilong Shi and Thomas Shen. The full spin-off plan involving Ali Cloud is both bold and puzzling. Ali Cloud is Baba's organic business and is still deemed as one of the long-term drivers for the group, even though its growth temporarily slowed down in recent quarters due to macro headwinds. That's why we find it puzzling that Baba has decided to fully spin off its business instead of retaining a minority stake at least. Very interesting situation at Alibaba Cloud.
I'm surprised. Actually, I thought we were going to end up talking about Alibaba on the show at some point.
Yeah, I thought it was going to get big enough that eventually it would warrant at least a casual look at it like we do with Oracle, where, either to mock it mercilessly or to at least, see it as a respectable player out there. But yeah, it's I hadn't realized it had started losing so much market share because it was a pretty big deal when we started the show back in 2019 or 2018. It was an up and comer and everyone was talking about it.
Yeah. I always figured the fact that I didn't hear about it more was more about, the access I have to information rather than it not doing anything. So it's very surprising. I hope it's not bowing down to political pressure. Just, that possibility is always unfortunate, right? When it's taking away the ability for people to operate and people's hosting stuff. Just, some of the article comments about, their role in cybersecurity breach and that stuff is, that stuff happens when you're hosting hardware. And it's not fun.
Yeah. Find a hyperscaler that hasn't been involved in a breach.
Yeah. Good luck.
Especially with how large of a market share that they have out there, even with the breach and everything else, I'm still a little bit surprised. Definitely there's something behind the scenes that, is in public, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I think overall Chinese market, we're basically entering a very Cold War period between the U.S. and Chinese. And so that's going to be interesting to see how that continues to shake out. I saw some articles this week as well, like in the information about VC firms trying to exit their investments in China and just realizing that it's not going to be the growth engine they expect it to be. We talked about here on the show, even some of the supply chain issues with China, with the cloud providers and how that's impacted them. And now, I just saw this week, Apple just announced that they were going to start making chips with Broadcom on U.S. soil for some things. So, there's definitely a undercurrent in our politics about China in general. And I wonder if this is a reflection of some of, outside of China, they're not getting a lot of traction, plus this Beijing crackdown on cloud providers in general. Maybe this is just, a situation where it's just not good to be near it until it's going to have a bad implosion in economics.
Yeah. You heard there was, the embargo on, importing chips into China from the US, and you can sense all the political headwinds that's behind that. And it's a reaction to a move the US made very similarly. So I can see why businesses are sort of hedging their bets and, playing it safe.
On the flip side, I'm kind of curious to see how taking this business unit out of the general Alibaba is going to work, especially with, everyone starting to yell that the big tech companies are growing too large and everything. If this could be an interesting, test balloon to see how AWS could, spin out of Amazon, GCP could spin out of Google, Azure out of Microsoft. It could be an interesting playbook to see how they start to divide up the business units.
I mean, I really don't see anybody doing that unless they're forced to by the government.
Probably not going to be willingly, but yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to Amazon Web Services. They have another check the box from their announcements at reInvent. So now the Amazon SageMaker geospatial capabilities are now generally available. So no longer vaporware, as we like to call it. reInvent was the announcement for this in preview. The service makes it easy to build, train, and deploy machine learning models using geospatial data. And as part of the general availability, they're integrating this capability with KMS and VPC networks, which I'm shocked it took that long. There's several additional real-world use cases for this technology that they wanted to highlight in the article, and there's more in depth than I'll talk about here in the article, which you can click on in the show notes. You can use it to determine maximize harvest yield for food security. You can assess damage from earthquakes or other natural disasters. You can use it for climate change monitoring. They show you, lake levels over time being modeled in it. You can predict retail demands of new products, and you can use it to support sustainable urban development. Now, if you're excited to use this product outside of anywhere but the US, I'm sorry, it doesn't exist for you there yet. It is only available in US West 2. So that's the only general available region. There is a free tier available for the first 30 days that includes 10 free ML geospatial compute hours and up to 10 gigs of free storage and no $150 monthly user fee for one user. Everything above that. And after the first 30 days will now start costing you money, which I think, by my rough math on this, could get pretty expensive pretty quick. So be careful.
And my first thought was, well, how can those poor farmers afford technology like this? And I'm thinking, no, we're talking about like Monsanto's of the world, not mom and pop subsistence farming.
Yeah, I don't see that now go build company in Indonesia using this. The farmers there, maybe the company that was insuring the farmers might use it, but that's a different business model.
Yeah, it's when you realize that actually 10 compute hours is your entire yearly profit on your crop.
Yeah.
I think the KMS and VPC integration, coupled with the fact that it's only available in one region, makes me feel like every time I get closer to understanding like AWS infrastructure, I get farther away. Like this is an interesting one, but I'm sure those two things are related somehow. Maybe a decoupling from US East 1.
Maybe they're using geospatial to estimate how to pack US East 1 and they didn't want it to run there. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I don't really understand this technology that well yet. I still like to learn it more, but the idea of being able to do this and model these things virtually and then do different impacts and assessments over time is interesting use case. I'm sure these use cases were enlightening to me because when they announced it at reInvent, I didn't know what to do with it. So now I at least have some frame of reference to how I might use it.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how they use it also, to help their sustainability play here. Are they giving it away to certain types of customers, in some way, shape, or form over time? And, to help, AWS's and Amazon's, saying that we're getting more green friendly and eco-friendly and everything too. So it'll be interesting to see over time if they start to say, hey, we gave away this technology to the farmers in Indonesia, or to whoever to help them with, better doing, farming and all these types of things.
All right. Well, let's talk about now Amazon Detective, which should have been named Inspector, but they already wasted the Inspector name on something else. And so here we are with Amazon security findings with Amazon Detective. Detective now offers investigation support for findings in AWS Security Hub, in addition to those things detected by GuardDuty. It's now easier than ever before to determine the cause and impact of findings coming from new sources such as AWS Identity and Access Management, which is pretty great. I happened to get an abuse report today on one of my instances. And so I was checking it out, and I ended up turning on the malware scanner on demand. So when they detect certain types of attacks, it'll scan your system to make sure it doesn't have malware installed on it. And I was playing with the detective and the inspector. And these have come a long way. I don't know if you guys looked at these recently, but I was impressed how much more data they have, the detail they're giving you about, what the exploit looked like, what it was targeting, what it was doing. And it was really great, except for the part where I had to then email abuse and tell them, I've checked my system and I've installed patches and I don't see any issues. And then I pointed at using all these tools to prove it. And they said, well, can you give us more details? And I'm like, I used your tools. That's how I did it. So other than that part of it, it was a good experience. So.
Yeah, sounds like two internal teams need to talk to one another, I think.
Our tools aren't good enough.
What did they detect out of interest? Was it like email spam or other stuff?
Running a WordPress site is a security nightmare of epic proportions. And so there is if you're using default WP login PHP pages, there's a way to basically you basically ride your traffic through someone else's WP login with an include that you basically look like you're coming from my site, but you're not actually coming from my site. But you're using my login page to basically redirect your traffic to another site. So yeah, it was annoyance. But the latest patch fixes it, the exploit. So fixed, won't come back
until the next one. Yeah,
until the next one. All right. Well, if you remember 5 years ago, and I almost think our show's old enough that we might have talked about this, or at least I remember this blog post. I don't know why, but Jeff Barr told us how excited he was that they were announcing that all of the AWS documentation was now available to you as open source and available on GitHub. But now, after those 5 years, they've decided that this experimentation of GitHub repos is now over. Most of the repos starting the week of June 5th will basically be deprecated. With all of the resources directly improve the AWS documentation website. The issue was that the primary source for most of AWS documentation is an internal system that had to be manually synced with GitHub repos. And despite the effort of their documentation team, keeping the public repos in sync has proven to be very difficult and time-consuming with several manual steps and some parallel editing. Since this effort was high and consumed time that they could have been used in other ways that more directly improved the quality of the documentation, they decided this wasn't worth it anymore, which I guess that just means they laid off too many people in the documentation team and now needed to cut back on something, and this was an easy mark. They do say they will be continuing to maintain repos that have code samples, sample apps, CloudFormation templates, and configuration files and supplementary resources, as those are primary sources and get high levels of engagement. And they said that if you use the thumbs up and thumbs down feature in the documentation, that they do review that on a weekly basis. And if you create a feedback form, it'll create a ticket directly to the person who's responsible for the document itself, which, man, can you imagine keeping that up to date? Someone quits and now you have to go update all the documentation that person did to some new person who owns it. So they get tickets assigned to them. That sounds horrible.
I mean, I think that, I at least think they're addressing the concerns of, why they were thinking about open sourcing those docs. That direct community engagement is the best way to sort of, farm out a lot of your work and spelling and errors and keep things up to date. And so I think that there's, I don't know how much value they got into it. I don't think I've ever detected anything and made like a pull request to the docs, but I always intended to if I found something. So I get it. A lot of interaction. Keep the good parts, hopefully. Get rid of the toil.
I'm just more curious of why it was so hard to sync them.
Right. It sounds like a bit of a diversion, honestly.
Like, are they using something besides Git? Like, they have code commit, so like that's Git base. But do they have some other SVN, some other source control internally that they had to like rebase every time into Git, and then from there, then sync, or like, I'm more curious of what all those processes were, besides maybe just cleaning up, documentation that wasn't ready to be public.
Well, I mean, if I were to be judgmental and assume a lot of things I don't know, either it's a system which is purely a web editor where they edit all these documents in a web page, and so getting that to Git was actually complicated, which is probably not likely knowing Amazon and their principles. Or it's a complete CI/CD pipeline that they had to basically strip out all of the automation code out every time they wanted to actually ship that into the public repos. And that was a big major pain in the butt for them to have to strip out all of the CI/CD and logic they used to actually build their internal build tool. an internal documentation capability. Because it's probably, in a full approval workflow and all kinds of things. And then how do you get it back into GitHub after the change has been made? I suspect there was just a lot of stripping of things they didn't want to be made public.
Well, if they can build RDS and orchestrate SQL Server clusters, you'd think they could orchestrate copying some docs up to GitHub. Seems a little odd.
On the flip side, I do remember, I think it was a couple reInvents ago when documentation got pushed to GitHub that wasn't meant to be public yet because they hadn't announced the feature till the next day, and somebody typoed the time and date off by a day or something. So I think it was like exactly 1 hour or 1 day before it was supposed to be released. So I guess I can also see them having some issues with, some of those types of things where they want to keep it up to date. And now you're managing two places. But again, I feel like Jonathan said, they're managing all these other systems. This feels like a technically solvable problem.
I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that they don't want Microsoft using all the contents of GitHub to train AI models or anything else.
So the one thing I did learn about this is that in the announcement where I saw this, they highlighted the importance of the new AWS documentation homepage portal, which I think I've seen this portal before, but I don't think I registered in my brain that it was a portal and that's what it was meant to be. I thought it was just a weird page. But if you go to the weird page, you'll see that they have basically links now to all of the documentation very quickly. So you don't have to use my favorite search method, which was always Google. So you can now find documentation and links to it much quicker, as well as hands-on tutorials, security, architecture center links. All the products are listed here. And then, of course, links to the CLI and the SDK tools and code examples all available here. Which is not a bad place. A nice single source of feedback. They are looking for feedback on this page, though. So if you would like to also complain about the very big, boxy, and weird colors that they've used, you can do so as well, which I did earlier today.
I'm just happy they have some really good documentation.
Wait, we didn't good?
GCP and Azure pales in comparison.
Good?
Yes.
Oh.
By comparison.
Okay.
By comparison, better.
Okay, sorry. I thought you just meant in general in the world of documentation, because I'm like, but then you compare it to Google or Azure. Okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay, yeah, 100% agree.
I will say I think the best documentation half the time is either the Terraform docs or the Boto 3 docs. I feel like even on Azure, I'm like, okay, how do I do this? Let me go find the Terraform resource and then look at all the options and then go understand what those options are. Because now at least I have the right keywords to everything.
I will guiltily admit I've done the exact same thing. Read the API docs? Nah.
I have also used the Terraform documentation just to understand because sometimes they're weird. The options in CloudFormation or in Terraform are weirdly named. And you're like, I don't know exactly what it is. And then being able to get from the Terraform to the actual API call has been really helpful because they go read the developer doc, which from Amazon, that's been a helpful link too. So yeah, there's lots of ways to do this. And then Matt contributed a second story. Now, again, he's the Azure guy, but he's committing multiple stories here not related to Azure, which tells you where his true heart is. But this one is about AWS partners can now bring choice of a temporary elevated accessible capability to IAM Identity Center. Customers of AWS IAM Identity Center can use CyberArk Secure Cloud Access or MEDIC and Okta Access requests for temporary elevating their access or just-in-time access. This is an ongoing collaboration with partners. AWS Identity validated these solutions integrate with Identity Center and address common customer requirements such as the ability to request and approve time-bound access to the audit action logs. And to audit action logs. Temporary elevated access allows a workforce user who does not have a standing permission to perform a task, such as changing the configuration of production environment, to request permission, receive approval, and perform the task during a specific time given to them.
As someone who's working towards developing this very same solution for a different project, this is fantastic. I think that the ability to have temporary access to cloud resources is a big key, and then especially if you're already leveraging an identity provider, being able to couple those together within IAM Identity Center is fantastic. So I like this.
Yeah, I think it's going to really expand. You work in Terraform or any of these automation tools, and there's just sometimes either the APIs are not available, or if you need to do something and then you're moving to something else, you have to go in and ClickOps a few things in order to make it all move properly. So having the ability to do this and say user A can go log in for 30 minutes during the maintenance window and be able to track all of it is a really nice security story and nice abilities versus, okay, let me go set a calendar reminder or, let me add you to an Azure AD group and then remove you from that group in the future. Anything along those lines just doesn't get done. So having it all just integrated in one spot, and especially if you're using these identity managers already, makes your life significantly easier.
Yeah, hopefully gone are the days when I get reminders on a Friday morning to remove somebody from a role or remove somebody from a group that I added them temporarily to, so they could get some access to something during an incident. It's a great solution. It's always even better that it's a third-party solution, and if it goes wrong, you can blame somebody else.
Or just the attestation that, oh no, this group membership is accurate. Yeah, I did that last week. Still accurate.
It's better than the tickets from your compliance department. Hey, can you go audit all the groups, send us the list, and verify who's supposed to have access? Oh wait, can you remove these 3 people? Cool, great.
And then regenerate all that same evidence.
Yeah. I have a very similar feature and process right now that I have to go through at work, where I get a monthly thing and says, is this access valid or acceptable? And I'm like, I don't know. Yeah. Like, doesn't have the reason why they requested it in the first place for me to answer that question. And I don't have a memory that well, so I don't recall if that's appropriate access or not. It's interesting today. I was setting up my CLI because I installed my computer and I didn't back up my keys file. So I've been deactivating some of my keys and some of my personal accounts. And so I had a desire to, as I was doing that security abuse thing earlier, I was like, I should set up my CLI because I like to look up some things. And so I was looking at setting up keys through the CLI of AWS Configure. And I was reading the docs because it had been a little bit hot minute since I'd done it. And I just was curious. And it was like, we don't recommend doing this way anymore. We recommend you use SSO, which is now Identity Center Services or something. And I was like, that's a good point. I should do that. And so I started going down the path of setting up AWS SSO. Have you guys done that? It's kind of a nightmare.
I started and stopped.
Like, I got through setting up my organization and then creating the users to use the organization as an identity store, which is sort of weird to me. I'm like, wait, when did organizations get identities, and why would I want them to be there? But I guess it makes sense. That's as far as I've gotten. So that's going to be a later Justin Doesn't thing. But the first step was already more than I wanted to go into my personal account. I realized that I'm regretting this decision. And I probably should go, before I regret this further, I should probably go make sure this isn't going to cost me a fortune. But
I'm pretty sure it doesn't cost you anything, Identity Center. I think they tried to make it so it can be an Okta replacement and kind of manage all external things through there. But really, I've only ever used it where everything links to SSO. So you set up it automatically generates the user and the groups, and it's all tied together. And in that case, where SSO then becomes, you get the nice page where you get all your accounts and everything, and you press the button and you can get your temporary credentials. And that way it works great. I've never used it as the other way. It like any SSO, I always feel like requires a little bit of black magic to set up, because you got to get all the right things in the right spot. And then as soon as it works, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to remember how to do this, and I'll deal with this again in 6 months when I have to go figure out how to set up SSO again.
Yeah. That's why I stopped. It was clearly going to take more, of a design and a thoughtful process than I was willing to take. I'm like, I'll just go play with this thing. Click, 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 click. Nope. Like, okay, wait, this is one of those things where you end up locking yourself out of your accounts, or you end up doing something like that just because you hadn't considered all the design.
Yeah, and I can see like at an organization level why I'd want to take the care. But like, if I have a single account, which I do in this case, because this is my personal account, why can't I just have a super lightweight? Why can't IAM in my account just become a very lightweight IDP, and then they just have this single sign-on temporary credential thing built into the I get why you want the bigger SSO in an organization and you want to eventually replace Okta, but I just need a lightweight system. Why so much complexity? I appreciate they did it. I don't know that it's the right strategy. We'll talk about it more when I finish doing this thing, because it was about 25 minutes of my afternoon spent starting down this path and then realizing it was going to take more time and I needed the weekend for it. So I will come back to this this weekend.
So you've gone from having to manage a a pair of credentials in a well-known place on your machine to having a username and password.
So now I have an organization and I have 2 identity stores, and a local IAM identity store and an organization identity store. So it's already going well. I've already added more complexity than I wanted.
Let's just remember to write the password on the post-it on your keyboard.
I feel like we're starting to get to old man yells at cloud, for like, it worked before. Why are we changing it?
Yeah. I'm regretting reading the part where it said like, this isn't the best practice anymore. I'm like, I think that's the best practice that I could have lived with. So, and that maybe might end up where I end up with this process is that I close my organization and I just do something else because I don't know that I want this much complexity in my life.
I'll give Amazon credit. They're at least not like making that impossible, right?
Can you delete organizations now?
I can ignore it forever.
That's a different story. At one point, you couldn't delete it, though. I don't know if they gave you the ability to delete the organization. I know you must be able to because I've moved organizations, accounts from organizations. So maybe. Yeah.
I mean, you can definitely detach sub accounts from an organization now and move them to another organization, which you could not do at one point. But
no, I've done it with what was the main organization account though. Oh, okay. Like which one held the organization roles?
Well, for a while though, you had to remove it from an organization to nothing and then add it to the new organization. Where now I think it's seamless.
Yeah, so you have to be able to delete an organization at this point.
Have you been waiting months and months to hire your new AWS, GCP, or Azure architect, only to have them be poached at the 11th hour by a startup with a juice bar? Initiatives stalled because you're having trouble hiring? Well, I have a simple solution: Foghorn Consulting. Foghorn Consulting provides top-notch cloud engineers to the world's most innovative companies and can be burning down your DevOps and cloud backlogs as soon as next week. Foghorn certified AWS, GCP, and Azure professionals are armed with infrastructure as code, and from day one will be designing performant, optimized cloud-native or hybrid environments that deliver on the promise of cloud. Their FogOps solution even provides on-demand cloud engineering to augment your existing teams. Visit www.foghornconsulting.com or send an email to cloudtalentnow@foghornconsulting.com and tell them the CloudPod sent you. Your dedicated FogOps team is with you for the long haul, and they bring their own juice.
All right, let's move to Google. Cloud Workstations is now generally available. And for those of you who think that I just said workspaces and it's been around forever, that's workstations, not spaces, because naming is hard. Workstations, for those who don't recall, was announced at Google Cloud Next last year. They introduced a cloud workstation in public preview as a vital part of the Software Delivery Shield offering to help address the challenges related to secure software delivery. Now, they're thrilled to announce the general availability of cloud workstations with a list of enhanced features providing fully managed integrated development environments on Google Cloud. And the cloud workstations enable faster developer onboarding and increased developer productivity while helping support your compliance requirements with an enhanced security posture. The goals are to speed up developer onboarding, provide consistent dev environments, and security hardened systems. And so if you would like to force all of your developers to go use a virtual workstation to do all their developer work, this is available to you now. The new capabilities include Beyond Corp Enterprise Integration, Beyond Corp Threat and Data Protection, Managed POSIT Workbench with RStudio, GPU acceleration support, G-Cloud CLI and Terraform support, a shared VPC, and more regions available to you than ever before. Now go build your software in the cloud.
This model cracks me up because, cloud security has all been about breaking down the hardened perimeter. But then the supply issues came along and they were trying to figure out how they could protect, the injection of malicious code via someone just installing dependencies. And immediately it's like, well, we're going to build a real big wall around it and it'll just be our wall. So it's cool. So it's sort of a challenge. I get it, because it's hard, but it's also sort of cumbersome in that same way that, enforcing security at the perimeter is. And so it's like, how much effort is it to maintain the dependencies? And there's going to be stuff that you just can't fetch from within this environment because it's not certified or, maybe it's too new. And it's going to be a pain. I get it.
I can see it be useful for keeping data that you're working with somewhere safe and protected. Secrets, maybe. I don't. Or
just DLP in general, right?
Yeah, I don't necessarily see the value in the bad actor. The bad developer could still inject code. It doesn't protect you against any of those things.
Well, if you can't copy paste into your workspace, you can't inject that code.
I mean, it does enable, companies to not have to buy $3,000-$4,000 laptops for every developer and just say, here's a Chromebook, go work on this thing over here. And then you probably have a lot of developers mad at you, but that's a different story.
Yeah, you ever try to run Microsoft Teams or Slack on a Chromebook? It's not going to work. That thing needs all the memories.
Yep. It would enable you to, I think, isn't Justin's goal just to use an iPad? In theory, he could just use an iPad and leverage this.
Clearly, Matt never does any development work.
Yeah.
I was leaving that point out. Just very careful with that.
I like the idea of having a standardized desktop with all the tools already installed, because it just really sucks to see, especially new employees, spending a month getting things set up. However, I do value my, not connected to the internet time, and I can sit on a plane and do some work locally. There's plenty of opportunities that will be lost, I think, by forcing people to only use this.
It's a good option, right? Like, when I think about, some of the struggles with data science and access to data, like this sort of, offering can make that really easier, but I don't think it replaces my local workstation. Like I tried to use, Code9 forever. Like, no, just can't. And it's not really the functionality of it. Like, they do a pretty good job developing these things. It's just not local. It's not mine. And it doesn't have, whatever widget I use. And so when I'm switching back and forth, I have to pay the context fee and I get distracted and I just end up never using it.
Yeah, I'm sure there is a very small class of customers who will love this, who asked for it, and then everyone else, the other 98%.
And none of them will use it, right? They don't need to. It'll be inflicted on other parts of their company.
It can be such a bad experience. I've heard terrible stories, especially offshore workers who are forced to use VDIs, and the VDIs are always thousands of miles away, even if they're on the right continent, Asia or Europe are large continents. They're slow, they're cumbersome, they're a nightmare to use. It's really, really demotivating. So unless it's like right in your back door and it feels like a local desktop experience, I think you're going to have a lot of pushback from people.
So, I mean, I just got access to a Windows 365 desktop, which is a true Windows 11 desktop experience. It makes my workspace look really bad.
Really?
Yeah, I'm very impressed with how fast it is, and my only complaint is they don't have like a native Mac client for it. You have to use it in a web browser, which is kind of my one complaint. But I haven't tried it on the iPad yet either. I should do that now that you mentioned it. But I've been using it the last couple of days, trying it out because we're rolling these out at work, and for our developers who have Macs with M1s, because the fun thing about M1 Macs is you can't compile x86 code on it, and so when we need to do that, you have to have it somewhere, and they're using these workspaces to do that. So there you go. But it's definitely interesting to kind of get exposure to the new Windows 11 experience, what that means, and it's kind of nice. I will admit.
I mean, you can, because I just use Rosetta to do exactly that with Docker. Yeah.
I mean, you can decompile. And you can run it. I didn't know that you
can use Rosetta and Docker Desktop to emulate an x86 environment, and dually builds in container. Works just fine.
I mean, you can. I'm not saying you
Is
can't.
It slower? Yeah, slightly. Does it work? Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. But for those developers who can't do that, then here you go.
I mean, they certainly can't test things locally. If they're building Windows apps and .NET apps and things, if that's an issue, then that's different.
Yeah, I mean, the use case used to be they would run a Windows VM in Fusion or something like that, and they do local testing if they needed to. But now you can't. Yeah, I think Fusion's finally come over for ARM, but I don't actually know how well that works.
Why don't you just get people Windows machines if you're building Windows apps?
I don't want a Windows machine.
Yeah, no, because I'll revolt.
I don't want a Windows machine, but give me a Mac that I have to use a Windows remote desktop to do my work
for that one thing in the sprint. Yeah, I'd rather have that.
I definitely don't have Parallels installed on my Mac with Windows installed, so I could do specific things that make my life easier.
Exactly. All right, let's move on to Azure. Speaking of Microsoft, Microsoft Build, which is their big developer conference, was this week, and guess what? They announced a ton of AI stuff.
No way.
Yeah, shocker. So first of all, if you upgrade your Windows 11 computer at home or at work, you're on Windows 11, or you're using a Windows 365 desktop 11 experience like I have, you're about to get a lot of AI built in. A lot of AI in the form of AI Copilot, which will be coming to Windows 11. But the cool thing about that is they're actually enabling those Copilot capabilities if you have plugins. Those plugins are available to developers to write their own plugins to actually augment and help you with your AI needs. Microsoft said they will use the same plugin standard as ChatGPT to allow easy interoperability between Azure AI and, of course, Microsoft's Copilot AI solutions and GitHub AI. So you get the advantage of being able to write those plugins once and use them wherever you want to. So in the Azure family, Azure AI Studio was the first big announcement, which will make it simple to integrate external data sources into Azure OpenAI services. In addition, they're introducing Azure Machine Learning Prompt Flow to make it easier for developers to construct prompts while taking advantage of popular open source prompt orchestration solutions like Semantic Kernel. Azure OpenAI service is bringing advanced models to integrate external data sources into Azure OpenAI service. In addition, they're excited to introduce Azure Machine Learning Prompt Flow to that process as well. And then one I was excited about, Microsoft Fabric is a new unified platform for analytics that includes data engineering, data integration, data warehousing, data science, real-time analytics, applied observability, and business intelligence, all connected to a single data repo called OneLake. But the cool part is Copilot in Fabric is an every data experience. Customers can use a conversational language to create data flows and data pipelines, generate code and entire functions, build machine learning models, or visualize the results. So write your report as just talking to it. I'd like a report that shows this chart with this data set, and it'll just make it. And if it can do that for pivot tables, I am in love.
It's very Star Trek-like, isn't it?
It is. And then if you didn't like Google's cloud workstations, they announced that Azure DevBox, which is their version of a developer in a box solution, is including customization now and a new starter developer images. So you can also get a developer experience. Now, I don't know why we didn't go with Azure DevBox. We went with Windows 365, but there you go.
So we were right about low code being a non-starter. I just don't think we quite saw these AI tools coming quite as fast as they have.
Yeah. Drag and drop, we knew it wasn't going to work, but if I could just say it, well, okay. Yeah. No, it's because there's nothing worse than trying to figure out, the fields of a data and dimension it the right way and then screwing it all up and not knowing how to get back to the 3 changes ago when it was sort of what you wanted, but not quite. And I do really like this. I've been playing around with more and more solutions that are similar, asking for like, what's the, most, what has the most hits in this field or whatever, trying to figure that out, and it just graphs it all out. It's really nice. And, I'm lazier for it, which is great.
I think the race is like officially on now between Google getting Bard or whatever integrations and personal assistants set up on Android phones and maybe Chromebooks. They don't really hear much about Chromebooks anymore. And Microsoft on Windows 11. One will win. Just imagine what would happen if Microsoft still had a phone ecosystem. That would have been a huge game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely don't think that anybody saw AI coming in our conversations about low code, no code. So I think now that we see low code, no code, now it all makes sense now we see AI, it makes sense how low code, no code will work. I just didn't have the foresight to see that part of the picture, but here we are. But it'll be interesting to see continue what people actually start doing with these things. I'm waiting for more commercial applications to get launched, but everyone and their mother has an AI announcement, it seems. I actually saw some rumblings about Amazon's AI capabilities. It's hard to get into, apparently, if not impossible, to get into their large language model over at AWS. So curious to see if they catch up and how they catch up this year at reInvent, because I think right now, if you look at the 3 cloud providers, they probably are the weakest in terms of AI for LLM model. All right, well, let's move to our Cloud Journey series. Today, we're talking about security in cloud native. And there's quite a bit to unpack here. There's, of course, managed services and security. There's connectivity capabilities, as well as how do you deal with things like dynamic environments and auto scaling and all these other things that are kind of side effects of cloud native in some ways, through a security team who wants you to install firewalls and DLP solutions and all kinds of horrendous things. But I think the very beginning place that I'd probably start in security and cloud native is encrypt everything everywhere. And that's from both a TLS perspective of the data moving between components and APIs and microservices and endpoints, as well as the data at rest when it sits on a disk. That's encrypted using your own KMS keys, either provisioned through a KMS or potentially even using an HSM appliance if you're in a high security environment.
Yeah, I feel like it goes back to, I think it was like Vogel's shirt from years ago that was like encrypt everything. Mm-hmm. If it's anywhere possible, you should be running encryption. There isn't a massive overhead. I remember back in the day, I was working, with a company, and this is like 20 years ago. They were like all excited because on the firewalls, they were going to decrypt all the SSL on the firewalls and not have to pass the traffic through to the underlying hosts for the web servers. And nowadays, it's the exact opposite. Decrypt one place, re-encrypt going to the next level. It doesn't add anything. It doesn't cost you that much. Just do it. And then you're also going to make your security department, your compliance department, any audits you have to go through be exponentially easier and happier.
I think there's more to that, though. I mean, you can encrypt everything, but now you've got keys to manage. So do you use a cloud provider's key store, or do you not trust them like a lot of people don't and use HSMs or something else?
I mean, it's a big thing, right? You have to design your application to take advantage of that too. Are you going to encrypt everything using a single key, or are you going to encrypt maybe per environment? You're going to handle it at that level, or are you going to do like per customer if that's applicable? And so a lot of the design sessions, you have to sort of figure that out and figure out if you can take advantage of, a managed provider to handle that for you, or at least, act as the distributor or coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kill yourself in complexity here if you don't think it through. This is definitely an area, as you think about your cloud native architecture, you need to think about your encryption strategy. And is it tenant level? Is it in database? Is it column level? Is it row level? There's lots of technologies. We talked about many of them, on the show about different encryption models and different security things being added into things like SageMaker and Vertex to support those use cases. So it's definitely something to consider. And it even gets more complicated as you're thinking about your data lake, right? And separating your data from the application and your monolith into a data lake. And then how do you now encrypt that data? And how do you get the benefits of big data if you have to do encryption and decryption in the middle of it? There's a lot of things that kind of come into play on that that you have to think through. There are some managed services to help you with some of this, like DLP from Google is a great one, I think. To really, you can get a cloud native tokenization capability with DLP, which is nice, and the ability to actually say, this data that is sensitive PI data, I want to use a token. I want to get that token from the DLP solution, and then I want to store that data in my database. But the reality in most cloud providers, other than Google, they don't really have this capability as a managed service for you. You get things like Config and Security Hub, which are more like security assessors, or things like Inspector we talked about earlier, or potentially some type of threat detection or threat hunting capabilities. But you don't get a lot of data security elements from the cloud providers here. So this is an area that you do end up typically rolling either custom third-party software or you're writing your own solutions using services like Vault or KMS to then natively do things in this particular space. So this is an area, I'd probably say it's the weakest area of cloud native, in my opinion, on what's available to you as a managed service, but it's so important. You can't forget about it.
Wasn't it Peter's prediction? I feel like every year for multiple years that AWS was going to roll out a DLP solution.
I think I started it and then he took over.
Well, they got a checkbox now that makes buckets not public anymore.
Yeah, by default.
It automatically does that now.
Done and done.
What else do we need? Why would we encrypt the data? That makes no sense. Mm-hmm. So you kind of start thinking about, this story, again, you kind of get into zero trust access, which we'll try to have a whole segment just on zero trust at the point in the future. But, being able to dynamically pipe traffic between different components, being able to, use attribute-based access controls versus role-based access controls, like this becomes a big part of your security story as well. But what do you think about, dynamic environments, Ryan, and securing these things? How does that work with a Palo Alto firewall, perhaps?
Yeah, well, not great if you don't do it right? Like these things are, we've had decades of managing security in our environments and data centers, and we've built tooling to match. And it's always my favorite cloud experience when, the security team comes up and says, oh, we got a vulnerability at this IP. Like, that's not a thing. Like that IP is gone. That's been gone for a long time. Like it is an ephemeral construct, and a lot of the tools are built to identify those sort of things by stuff that's very static in a data center, but is not very static in a cloud environment. And so I think it's also one of those things where people need to really, think it through and not, ignore the contextual data of this. And so being able to enrich that wherever possible, as far as your application, deployment goes, with, tagging and any kind of, instrumentation you can put in the app itself, where, but then there's also sort of the, the challenge that I think security teams have, which are, they're going to have to do a better job at sort of, rather than just detecting this, like that detection needs to come with data enrichment at that detection method as well. It's definitely a challenge, but I mean, there's more modern solutions to these things. It's just don't rely on the old way of doing things necessarily.
And that's where I feel like a lot of, at least a couple of the security people that I work with and, talk to and I trust, are trying to move their companies and move, people away from all these old school, hey, this IP address has this vulnerability. Because one time I was told by a security department that a Windows server had a Linux vulnerability, or the opposite. I was like, this doesn't even make sense. Sure, I'll kill the server, doesn't matter. But, actually starting to look at it from the next level and, really taking, okay, how do we do it? How do we actually get our security in at the ground level versus tack it on at the end? And we can play buzzword bingo here. And, the big philosophy right now is shift left and, working through that, but, making sure that, like Ryan said, it's all enriched with all the data that security needs to do their job.
Well, I mean, great segue, because, shift left is an important part of this, which is, we have traditionally relied on infrastructure scans and hardened perimeters and sort of to ensure good security. But the reality is that these things are exposed. They are more public. There's much more control in the developer's hands as far as limiting or granting access to via network resources. And so that shift left is super crucial, because not only do you need to embed all that security into your applications, understanding the flows of and how these two things talk to each other. Sometimes it's with, even outside of your control. And so like, that's sort of one of those things where I think, we're only going to get there by moving this responsibility directly to the people that are, care and feeding these applications and the environments they run in.
Yeah, I think the problem is just that everyone had their own very siloed areas of responsibility. So you'd have the virtualization team and a network team and a release team, security team. They all have their own separate sets of tools with no access to each other's tools. And so it's really kind of like, this is the only way that those machines could be scanned was by feeding in a massive subnet and just pinging everything until they got some response from something, or installing agents everywhere. And it really isn't a model that translates well to the cloud and auto-scaling groups or managed instance groups. So, the tools of yesteryear, like Qualys, for example, they either need to modernize very quickly, or they're going to die a very quick death and lose out to much more sort of well-integrated tools like Bionic, for example, which we've looked at recently. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I've also looked at other solutions in the space too. Antimatter for tenant levels, encryption capabilities. There's a lot of technology coming in this space. So if it doesn't exist today, it may not exist. It may not mean that doesn't exist tomorrow, is what we're finding. And so as you continue down this path, continue to keep an eye on the market, attend conferences, keep listening to us, of course, and we'll tell you about cool stuff we run into. But the security space and cloud native is rapidly evolving. Shift left, DevSecOps, all these things are pushing the envelope of legacy tools. And so you're seeing new vendors kind of step into the fray to meet those needs from a cloud native perspective. Awesome. Well, guys, I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the cloud. See you next week.
See you later.
Bye everybody.
And that is the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Foghorn Consulting. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and tweet us your feedback at #TheCloudPod. Or join our Slack channel, go to our website, thecloudpod.net for sign-up instructions. So for today's after show, I did a thing.
I did a thing?
Yep. And I blame Sarah for this thing. Because a friend of the show, Sarah Simcoe, or Tumbarella, as we know her, basically was complaining to us in our internal Slack channel about her need to visualize our cloud infrastructure, which is always a fun thing. And so she was talking about a tool she was looking at called Cloud Docket, which I had never heard of. And so I said, well, I don't know how much I believe in this tool. And so I went out and I played with them on my personal account, actually my friend's personal account, barbecuegrills.com. If you're looking for a grill, I plug for him as I use his website as my trial for this conversation, because it was a little bit more interesting than the CloudPod account, because he actually has multiple web servers and a load balancer and containers and things running in it. And so I went on a journey and I went to go play with these tools, and I gave my feedback to Sarah. And so I thought I would share these with you. And so let's start out with Cloud Docket, which is the one that Sarah recommended. And I'm including these in our chat room, so you guys are doing these real time here. So this is a web server. Basically there's two documents here. There's first a listing of all of the assets in the account, which I can literally get from basically any API call. Cloud Docket did include a little bit of security checks, and things that they thought were things you should be aware of. They gave you a breakdown and some pie charts around different things, compliance rule violations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then a listing of a ton of things. And this document that this generated is over 244 pages long. So not super helpful. And then it gave you a diagram, which is the Cloud Docket by location diagram it gave you, which is the region that is, and it's not horrendous other than it's about 12 miles wide. And you can basically see, all the different VPCs and subnets and all the ENI attachments in this one here. So this is my first attempt. Would any of you guys pay for this tool?
No, I have a question though. To qualify that, is this the only output from the tool? Is this literally what you get when you run the tool, or can you kind of export it in something that's usable?
So this was the output of the tool. I do believe I could modify it as a PNG or a PDF. You do have to modify it in their tool.
Even more useful.
So even more useful. So you can't really. None of these. I will say none of the three tools that we looked at here today like natively output into VSD file unless you pay for the enterprise version that I could see. But the Cloud Docket was very bare bones, and I don't know where she found this tool. And I said, there must be something better. And so I went and searched. And my next one up was Lucid Scale, which I think Ryan actually suggested in the chat. And so I went and I ran the same thing. And now I would like to point out that most of the providers other than Cloud Docket, gave me the option of giving them, sharing permissions through IAM roles. Cloud Docket, I had to give it actual keys, which was not so great. So always a quality sign of a quality product when you have to give it keys. So let's move on to Lucid here, and these will all be in the show notes for you guys to poke at so you can see them. This is better. I will say I was very pleased with the first outcome of my Lucid graph. This one was a little more better organized. It was still wide, but not 12,000 miles wide. But very basic. It didn't have any security controls. Not that I really care what Cloud Docket gave me from that space, but it was a nice plus one to have. And it gave me a respectable viewpoint of this particular network. The VPCs here, I see my things. I don't see any of my public IP addresses, but I do see my load balancers. It doesn't break out some of the things like the buckets that are involved, like the other one you saw. So this is my Lucid Scale demo. And like I said, I don't hate this. This is, I think, a good starting place for many people to then take this and go edit it in Visual Studio. Lucid actually had pretty nice online editing if you pay for the enterprise features. You can edit this pretty easily in their tool. It can help you lay things out. You can double click into these boxes, and it gives you kind of the next level breakdown of them. So it's not horrendous, but there you go.
Oh, so this is the picture is sort of a live document where you can interact with it,
and you can share it to people, and they can go play with it too. So you don't have to do everything, in PDF or PNGs. You can actually make that a live share and out there.
This tool got a lot better. I remember beta testing it with them like I don't know how long, like a couple years ago, and like we tried to run it against one of our accounts, and it looked a lot more like the first one that you posted. So they've definitely done a lot to like kind of clean it up and organize it in a way that kind of makes a little bit more sense. I do like the fact that or I assume like you said that you can like double click in and hopefully get like a little bit more of a detailed view on specific pieces.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I've drawn this document or versions of it so many times, right? In different tools, and so like it's nice to have that auto generated, and the fact that if it's dynamic, especially if you could integrate it into a cloud security posture management server or something along those lines, it would be super cool to do. I'd love to have sort of a visual CMDB, if you will.
It's not bad. It looks nice. It's certainly something I'd put in a slide, but it doesn't do a good job of showing me the flows of data from various places to other places. It's still kind of very inventory based.
Well, I think the reality is a lot of these tools have a very inventory perspective. And some of them do have more, like you can add flow log analysis to it and things like that. I think that was one of the things LucidScale had as one of their enterprise features. And it can give you some more detail on that. But again, like the amount of time that I spent on these, I think each tool I spent probably 20 to 30 minutes on playing with it and just kind of seeing what it could do. Just get kind of an idea of what its capabilities were. But again, I think there's no end all be all perfect solution to these tools. And then my the final one I looked at though is a company called Hava.io. And this one I actually liked quite a bit. It was my winner, just to bury the hatchet here a little bit. So the nice thing about this is they broke it down into multiple tabs. So it wasn't just one diagram and then double clicking. It was like, here's several different tabs you can look at. It very clearly articulated out my different buckets, which have static websites in them. It gave me all of my DNS information very clearly, where it's all pointing into a single ALB, and that ALB is then routing traffic between the three different nodes that I have in the system. It's really easy to see. You can see my alerts here as well, which was kind of a nice touch, and I can see some of my Lambda code in the everything document. And then if you broke it down into the VPC, you could actually start seeing, just a VPC view, which was very similar to what we got from LucidScale, with less detail. So overall, I thought, this was pretty nice. It was easy to read. I was able to follow the flow relatively easily, and so this one was my winner out of the three.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Sarah and I are talking about how we can maybe go use this on the day job for Google. But it's nice to see some options. So I wanted to share these with you guys. I thought you might be interested.
Yeah. No, I mean, and this goes to exactly what Jonathan was referencing. This one has, sort of that flow through from load balancer to individual nodes and that relationship, as well as, connectivity between VPCs. So, yeah. But it's still readable, which is sort of amazing, because even when I do it by hand, it turns into like sort of a pile of spaghetti I threw on top of a network diagram. So this is great.
Yeah, because the real answer to what do we have deployed in an account or in a project should be, well, let's refer to the architecture diagram.
Yeah.
We should know what we've got there because we put it there. But that's
you.
never the case.
You're so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your perfect world.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, let me just come down from my ivory tower. Yeah.
So there you go. That's that was my Justin Does a Thing I thought you guys would enjoy.
Yeah.
Kind of seeing what I was playing with here in this particular case.
I look forward to, I'll probably have to implement this.
I'll see what the last one was the last one, because I would have also stopped at that one. Not just because I'd spent an hour on it already, but because that's decent output.
Well, I was sort of, there were a couple other players that I was sort of interested in. I think Ryan actually mentioned another one, but it didn't support Google, which was a big killer for us because it was part of our value. We need something that provides multi-cloud, and we have Azure and we have AWS and we have Google, and that's why we need kind of the next level to see how it works in a Google environment, because maybe it's not as good in Google. But it was really came down to, if it didn't support Google, I wasn't going to try it. And so there's a couple